an interesting panel discussion for you, where a group of industry experts will present their ideas on the subject, impact of social media and its repercussions on mental health. Spending more than 3 hours on social media per day puts adolescents actually at a higher risk for mental health problems. What can we do to limit the negative consequences of social media use? This is one of the many questions that the panelists will address in this session. Please welcome the session moderator, Natanya Wachtel. She is the founder of the New Solutions Network and the CMO and Chief Community Officer at Evermore. She will be joining us on stage right away. Also, before we start, I have badges here for Sutessa Anthony and Linton Kareen. Sutessa Anthony and Linton Kareen. This young lady here over on the side, raising her hand, will have those for you. If you want to see her, she will get you taken care of. Stage is all yours.
Thank you. Hi there. Wait, this is height impairment. One moment. So I'm just going to introduce my esteemed colleagues here. First up is Dr. Jeff Nugent. He is a licensed marriage family therapist in 5 states, and I think going for more. A professional clinical counselor, and he focuses on adolescents and adults dealing with depression, anxiety, addiction, social media, video games, self-esteem, relationships, and behavioral issues. His dissertation focused on adolescent and effects of video games on quality of life, resilience, motivation to play. His work for nonprofits was on a mobile crisis team with suicide assessments and family support for children with mental health disorders. He was also a supervisor of behavior and mental health for school districts, creating mental health programs for general education. What else? A lot of things. He's founder of the CEO of Nugent Family Counseling Center, and his private pay company located in several cities: San Jose, Santa Clara, Los Gatos, California, and Reno, Nevada. They help families with wide areas of support. I don't know if there's anything you'd like to add, because that's quite an impressive, truncated biography of Dr. Nugent. So, welcome. Okay, next on the hit list is Babita. So Babita is an award-winning, internationally recognized psychotherapist, executive coach, mental health consultant, and relationship expert. She focuses on helping people optimize their relationships and thrive in all facets of their lives. She's formerly a lawyer and Wall Street executive, and brings a unique perspective in that to manage mental health issues and relationships in the workplace. Develops business strategies relating to human dynamics and resolves high conflict issues. In her private practice and public engagements, she empowers people and organizations to examine and redefine relationships as a tool for personal and professional growth. Babita is a sought-after expert in media across the globe. She's been featured on media outlets such as Forbes, Bloomberg, ABC, NBC, CNN, Men's Health, Business Insider, MSN, Elle, Huffington Post, Washington Post, South by Southwest, and many, many more that I can't fit on this iPad. She is a recipient of the New York Psychotherapist Award, and obviously she just received a Health 2.0 Leadership Award, and has really showed us all how we can focus externally and make this world a better place. So welcome, Babita. Next, we have Carrie Karki, our resident expert on all things marketing. She is the founder and president of White Box Marketing. It's a full-service marketing and advertising agency in servicing businesses of all sizes. She's been doing this for over 20 years, and they include strategic planning for long-term client partnerships, and they have an award-winning team of creatives that support her. Carrie is an active member of her Central Minnesota community, including multiple leadership groups, personally and professionally. She's very philanthropic, and she's an advocate for unity, embracing all of our different backgrounds, locally and globally. Welcome, Carrie. Okay. Oh, I was going to call you Dr. Priya because I have a friend Priya, but I don't know if you go by that for short. Sorry, we just met. Dr. Priya Mathur is her vision is to help transform healthcare from a sick care model to a data-driven predictive model. She uses the science of AI and machine learning and has a precision medicine quality healthcare system that's affordable and accessible to everyone, imagine. Regardless of insurance or socioeconomic status, that's a big part of your mission, to help bring care and reduce those barriers. She's a frequent speaker on the healthcare circuit. Dr. Mathur is a healthcare visionary who believes that every individual and family desires to take charge of their health, but they often lack the time or information, money, and tools. So she's created an innovative health app that helps individuals and entire families take control of their health by making prescriptions affordable, for one, making treatment manageable, and having personal and family health data accessible. Imagine your own data to have it at your hands and to be shareable on demand in one easy, useful app. So welcome to. Oh, and sorry, we're missing a wonderful guest, but she had some travel delays, so sorry. In spirit, you're with us, Dr. Josephine. So our first question I'm going to ask and direct it to Babita first, if that's okay, is around the pandemic and how the pandemic has, everyone I'm sure is very aware how it's exacerbated mental health problems. That's not going to be a shocker for this audience, but we'd like to focus on how that's really exploded in social and what you're seeing that is being done about it that's working well.
It's a great question. As everyone is aware, under the pandemic was really the impact on mental health during the pandemic. And I would say that social media played such an integral part, first in a positive way, of people feeling very connected to individuals where you couldn't see anybody, they were locked down, there was quarantining, and also feeling connected out in the world to what I would call the collective trauma that was taking place. However, on the other side of it, in that sort of space of trying to continue to stay in the know and be connected to individuals, what started to happen is a term that's now called doom scrolling. And doom scrolling is where individuals are now relying on social media, where they're taking in a lot of negative news and a lot of, adverse impact. How many people have now, the death toll around COVID, et cetera, as well as other negative things that were happening. What that meant was individuals started to become very addicted during the pandemic to negative news and continue to doom scroll. That then, statistics show, elevated the amount of anxiety and depression, even loneliness, because they were just sitting there in that space of continuing to absorb a lot of negative information that now connected to them psychologically, and it became very difficult for them to get out of it. So even though we have a lot of different positive things around the space of social media and community, we also had the pandemic under the pandemic, which was that addiction, depression, and anxiety that happened during the pandemic.
Thank you so much. Dr. Priya, would you like to say something on that as well?
I think I would like to add a few numbers there. With the numbers, pre-pandemic, it was 1 in 10 in United States that, I would say this mental health related to social media were the numbers. But with pandemic, everyone having more time, staying at home, the numbers have increased from 4 in 10. Which is a big number. And I would say how we can see, especially the younger generation, that they are getting addicted to it is by seeing the behavior. If the last thing that they're going to bed is the phone or a tablet that they're looking at, or the first thing when they're waking up is that means they have started into the path, there's addiction or something going on. And I think it's early check is very important, especially in the COVID time or in the pandemic. We were all families were together in house. So it was much easier for us to focus and be more vigilant. But I think this came also sudden for being locked at home that we couldn't focus on that. Everybody got into positive but also negative use, as you just pointed, for the social media. And we observed whatever was presented. So I think the filters were not there, and that is something definitely added to the problem and the numbers.
Yes, thank you, absolutely. And I'll add one comment too from the Gen Z focus, because that's where I'm currently focused right now, in terms of most of us get some pleasure in some way if we are fortunate enough to have a roof over our head and food on the table and access to health care, that some of the pandemic was a nice break from the hustle bustle of the world. For a lot of young people, school for them was a big part of their mental health, their buoyancy, their ability to feel praised and feel included and things like that. And when that was taken away, for a lot of kids, they retreated much more inward, and they didn't have the tools. They didn't. I was told that you don't call people on the phone. Apparently, when you're 16 or 17 years old, you send pictures of yourself. And there's really this whole new way of looking at who do you look to for role models, who do you look to for behavior models. And in the olden days, there were a few celebrities, there were a few athletes, there were a few Nobel laureates that everyone sort of gathered around. And now it's some person who's curated this faux persona of perfect happiness on a beach everywhere, and they just consider themselves other. They don't necessarily aspire to achieve, they actually feel worse about themselves when that is what they're bombarded with all the time. And so it kind of exacerbated that comparing and feeling other for a lot of young people. So there's obviously a lot of work to be done there. Okay, so next question. I'm not going to add on every question, don't worry. So what about some of these unrealistic expectations? I wanted to kind of follow into that. In terms of some of these unrelenting standards, this perfectionism that I was just speaking about, being preoccupied with it, and what are you seeing done to combat this? Jeff, I'd like to ask you that.
Yeah. So we know that the way social media is running and how it's programmed is to get people to stay on their apps more. There's a lot of filters and a lot of things that are happening on these apps now. I'm not sure if any of you are aware of the latest filter that came out, where you can actually remove people or remove things that are unwanted in your photo very easily and quickly, and then post it. Now, when you think about these social media apps and how that's working and all the unrealistic aspects, we also know that there's all these things going on in just how people are then perceiving themselves, and actually going out and getting medical procedures to alter themselves to fit more what their visual or their profile looks like. So as we're thinking about the mental health aspect and how that is impacted, it's figuring out, why are these things going on? What can we do to help prevent and curtail them so that we can reduce it? Right? Some of the measures that are out there right now is about how many followers you have, how many likes you have, how many comments are being posted to you from each person, why or why not. Our teenagers now are suffering from the aspect of, instead of dismissing a friend when you were in middle school and you going off and finding new friends, what's happening is you're moving away from your friends, but they're still connected to you on the social media. So they're learning and seeing that you no longer are friends that way. And it's starting to be impactful in their mental health, because they are starting to feel left out. They're starting to feel removed. They're starting to feel discounted. So we're having to look at what these expectations are in the social media and understand how we can move with changing the social media piece, but teaching our kids what this means. Not only do we say, well, they've unfriended me, well, what does that mean and why? Is that happening in real life, or is that only on social media? How much of an impact is that in your life if it's just on social media? They blocked me. That's my favorite one from a lot of my clients. I've been blocked. My life is over. I'm like, really? Your life is over because somebody blocked you on their Instagram page? Hang on a second. Let's slow this down and look at what's going on to help you move forward. So it's having that information being put out there about what this actually is and how they identify themselves and what they can do to move away from that imposter identification to who they truly are inside, and how they can represent that on the truth on the outside.
Thank you. Babita, did you want to add to that?
Yes, I'd like to piggyback on what Jeff was saying and look at it also from adults as role models for the younger generation, because this is also very systemic amongst adults too. The feelings that Jeff described that teens and adolescents are feeling, adults are also experiencing. And there's a real sense of feeling like an other when they see what other individuals are doing on social media platforms and measuring their success, whether it's in their jobs or in their relationships or what takes place in their families, based on what they're seeing in social media. Now, what happens if you have a parent or an adult doing that and they're in a role of teacher or caregiver or grandparent, et cetera, if they're already having their own mental health impact, they will project that out to their kids. Their kids will see it, right? So I think what's also happening is what's very systemic is that as adults, we're also being very influenced and our mental health is being impacted by these platforms, and then it also trickles down to kids that are also being impacted by it as well. I think what comes up in practice that I see that clients are often saying is they don't feel good enough anymore. They feel there's a lot of pressure and competition in how they show up, whether it's in the workplace or personally, very impacted by also their own body image now, feeling like they have to be perfect, whether in the workplace or out socially. And all of this is very elevated because of what they are, how they're engaging on the platforms. So I would suggest boundaries, 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 really to sit down and think about, what platforms am I on? Am I using social media now as a form of comparison that's impacting me negatively? Or can I use it where I'm using it for maybe volunteering or connections of more positive ways? Figure that out so that you can help your kids figure it out.
Yeah, it's about teaching, right? It's about teaching them how to use it and to use it well. And we have to learn how to use it. And I think in a lot of ways, we're still behind as adults, especially with all the stuff that's coming out now.
Yeah, and on the flip, I guess one area where there seems to be, again, statistically, this is an average, some positive change is actually with older adults who are coming into social media now, some for the very first time. And like was said earlier, it depends on, of course, the access point, if you will. Some of the more passive, press a button and watch it systems seem to be working. And again, I don't mean that in a condescending way, I just mean for access because they might not be familiar with the tech. But I noticed there's a lot of trends of seniors making TikToks, and it's a really great way to see people embracing technology as a way to be a bridge for their mental health, because they didn't have necessarily huge social networks up until that time, but their grandkids or their kids are getting them tablets to be able to connect and do FaceTime and see them because they're afraid to, go out since COVID. And it's actually kind of this burgeoning boomer social situation, and we're learning about everybody's, HIPAA beware. I don't know, because there was the NIH gentleman, but people are sharing everything and anything, but in a really wholesome way. You see people struggling with cancer recovery, being alone, being a care partner for a partner with dementia, that kind of stuff, finding essentially the beauty in the social networks that sometimes gets overlooked in sort of the competitive set that the younger side is going. So it's really interesting also for me to see sort of different new social baselines coming out across the different generations. Did anyone have anything to add, or can I go to the...
I think if I can add to this, I also feel like it's like the information has to be given when the information to be provided. And I think, as you just pointed about the elder generation coming into it, and actually for them, this is more the platform to reach and to open and what they didn't have when they were growing up. It provides a new platform, and I would say a little more joy when your young kids are, your grandkids are not around. So giving the information at the right time, to say providing this social media platform at the right age is quite important, because you know what to filter and what not. You don't believe everything and everything you see. As adults, we still filter. We still get fascinated at some times, but we still know what to filter. But these teenagers and young kids are still not experienced well enough in their life to know what is true and not. So I think social media is as a platform is not negative like that, but it's like who and when you're using it.
No, that's a great point. And that's what I meant too, I guess, as the follow-on final topic there, is that the difference is that the young people are tech natives and they were born into tech, right? And so they are evolving their sense of self, their identity, and who they are with the tech. And the seniors and the older folks who are coming into it later, they're pretty fixed generally, right? They're established. So they have their heroes, their idols, their sense of self. And so they use it for, like, at a lighter level. And that's almost like the purest form, right? So when you think about children being the pure entity, we've actually seen the reverse. And so we were wondering if there are ways to take that joyful experience of a positive connection with a stranger or a positive connection with someone that you know and help for betterment and bring everyone up. So we can probably take a page from their habits. Okay, so can we shift a bit about some of the specific health treatments, mental health treatments that have been popularized through social media and what, you are seeing be done about sort of balancing that pop culture mental health? I think of a lot of the TikToks, or reels, whatever you want to call them, videos on social around, if you're feeling this, like feeling depressed, do this. Here are 3 steps. And sort of like everyone essentially is a guru right now. There is, life coach, mental health coach, wellness coach, that kind of thing. And also just, Joe, Jane, whoever on the street offering essentially clinical advice. And some of them become quite popular. Jeff?
Yeah, so that's a great topic. We see a lot of armchair therapists nowadays, right? Everyone's offering advice. Sometimes the advice is good, sometimes the advice is coming from therapists and they're just rephrasing what the therapist has said. The aspect of the positives, and I'll get back to that in just a second, doesn't outweigh the negatives. At the same time, the negatives are simply that as people are sharing, we start to stigmatize mental health disorders. It starts to become this concept of it's a one-size-fits-all. If you have depression, you have to fit these standards or this criteria, and if you're not showing those, then you don't have depression, right? So Goffman characterized the term stigma back in 1963 that represented the less than perspective or less than human type kind of mentality. We're seeing that happen all over there, constantly still, where people are sharing terms online, saying so-and-so is this, so-and-so is that, and the comments. If you just read any comments on a lot of these TikToks, you can see some of these negatives unfold and how it creates this stigma, this stereotype. And it can also reduce some of the severity of mental illness. When we think about, for example, OCD, the latest term I've heard when somebody says, oh, I'm so OCD, is it's all about cleanliness. And we know OCD is a much bigger, much broader, much more in-depth concept than that. So those are some of the negatives when we think about the popularization of therapy. Now, great positives. It's really taken this back door or this back room approach of therapy and brought it to a light to say, hey, there's something to talk about. The Gen Z generation, as they're going about now, mental health is something to be talked about. It's something to be looked at and understood. I was in a high school recently, and one of the kids there was saying, I think everyone should have a therapist. They're amazing. I'm like, I agree with you. Like, let's move forward with this. But so we have to look at and understand, how do we then change that culture, this pop culture of what's stigmatizing things? How do we let them know that it's not a one-size-fits-all? Part of it is by us, by what we're doing here, by how we're approaching social media, by how we're getting on social media and sharing a generalized concept, but also letting them know that there are individual aspects that have to be met and understood, and how to help them move forward. That the treatment is not super easy all the time, that it's not a quick fix, but that it can take time, effort, and energy, but that they can do it. And I think that's the other big part about what's gone on, is that it is possible, and things can move forward for them, and they can find help.
Thank you. Carrie, I wanted to turn it to you. You're not safe. From your perspective in the marketing communication side, I'd be curious to see how some of your clients are thinking about this kind of thing in terms of their communication strategies.
Yeah, I'm kind of bringing a different perspective here today, but as a marketer and a communications person that deals with a lot of clinics, hospitals, from that perspective, indeed what we have seen, and part of this as a contributor to social media, right? But we're doing it in a different way. So some things that I have really seen has changed, especially in healthcare, is we're using social media, right? I mean, we have before, but what we know, especially since COVID, is we're taking data and we're taking content much more in a digital sense. So younger demographics, middle demographics, us older people, right? We're taking content, we're getting information much more digitally. So healthcare, right, in the client sector, we've really seen a lot of pivot changing, hence when COVID changed, we had to have a communications plan real fast, right? Telehealth happened. What are we going to do? How are we going to communicate this? How do we not only with our staff internally, but also with our patient network, right? And then our referring physicians and things like that. So definitely from our perspective, I would say on the communication side, I think as a marketer and somebody who does content for healthcare, we have switched it to more value-driven, much more for the patient. So if we think back to healthcare ads, 20 years ago, right? I actually just spoke at a conference on this last week. I put up some old ads, like honestly, we had healthcare facilities saying, with smoking cigarettes showing in an ad. We've come way far, right, from what we used to say on that old ad advertising in healthcare into what we are today. But it's much more changed to value-driven for the patient. So instead of just saying, here's the clinic that we offer mental health practices, we're an orthopedic practice or whatever sector of healthcare that we're in, it's really changing that value of content. And I think we're all very much responsible for that, of making sure the content that we're releasing and the communications that we have is indeed helping our patients, is leading them in the right sector that we're talking about and the impacts of this, and also that we're customizing our content that we have for each of these demographics. Yes, in social media. Yes, the TikToks. We didn't do that 5 years ago, right? We do that now. So, and making sure that the content that we're releasing is very much customized to the people that, to our audience with HIPAA compliant, but also much more value driven. There's definitely been a pivot of change in that, so.
Thank you. Babita, did you want to follow on with that in terms of communication and, maybe from the lens of, as a practitioner, in terms of what you feel like is sort of the table stakes now, perhaps?
No, absolutely. It goes into the basket of what are some ways social media can be used in a healthy, positive way. So, for example, I think, Jeff, you were talking about some of the things around things being bundled, and we are sort of trying to remove away from the stigma, but at the same time putting it into maybe categories that might be lighter than they should be, or individuals losing sight of particular unique journeys. So I do think what's important is, as a practitioner, the use of social media is in terms of valuable content. What are the resources that we are putting out? What are the resources that anyone in the healthcare field is putting out, even if one person takes that in and it can make a difference? But I also do feel that it's important to have that individual contact as well, so that there's more awareness around if someone is depressed, there's different levels of depression, right? If someone has OCD, there are different levels of it. And even though we've moved away that mental health does not mean mental illness, that we still are aware that we still have some very serious diagnoses, and it should be okay for individuals to know that and make sure that they follow the right paths in terms of the individuals that have the expertise around it. Because there is a lot of misinformation out there, and sometimes it's not taken as seriously. I know just one more note that I felt like I wanted to say around this, just piggybacking on things that could be toxic in social media, is toxic positivity. When we're told, oh yes, if you do this, you can be happy, or the steps to happiness, or we all need to be resilient, and that doesn't work if you're experiencing trauma. That doesn't work if you're clinically depressed. That doesn't work if you're being cyber bullied. Let me just be happy about it. These are serious issues, and I think it's important that those are also elevated, and if we use social media in the right way, it can be a really amazing platform to utilize.
Thank you. Does anyone have any follow-on for that?
Yeah, real quick.
Sure.
So there was a study done that was published in 2021 that took into account 11 countries over in Europe in 2020, spring of 2020. And they talked about how there was this formal integration of all of the social media platforms. And misinformation was the #1 area of concern, as rated by all these individuals that participated across those 11 countries. And it continues to be the case that misinformation is still very, very prevalent. And it's how do we get that content out to support people in understanding what the misinformation is versus the reality, right? Just because they have followers does not mean they understand what's going on, right? So it's figuring out how to structure it and really move forward in a positive way. Social media can be an amazing thing. It really can. It can really help people connect, families connect across countries, across the globe in a lot of different ways. Friends stay connected, right? But it can also be misused if not understood correctly. And it's how do we help them understand that to move forward?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think the credibility and the trust, which, are huge, giant words, I know, in umbrella terms, but that's another sort of layer of filter that can be difficult to discern. And there's sort of competing priorities. So sometimes you'd say, well, I trust this clinician because they went to medical school and they're going to be objective and that kind of thing. But yet, at the same time, people are more gravitating often to peers to look for, well, but they don't get me, or the doctors just want to push pills, or whatever their preconceived notion about why it's other. So I think that's another layer that we're dealing with, where it's sort of become an equal playing field across whose basically voice is the loudest, right? That's another differential that just made me think of, sorry.
Can I just add, one thing I would say is I would say that there's a lot of a lot of pivot change, right, that we're seeing. We're doing personalized content now. So we're having doctors do short videos and things like that. That we didn't used to do those type of things. So I think there's been a big change of having this personal approach to healthcare. People want that. We know that. I know I'm not a healthcare expert, but I work with you healthcare expert people. But I'm forced on my side of that to make sure that we're releasing content that's valid today, that's important today, and that we're also making a change for that. But it's that personal approach definitely has changed. Have you guys seen that with your practices too?
Oh yeah, a lot of people want that little video clip before they even come in, so they can feel like maybe that's somebody I can connect with, or I like the way they say that, or the way they're moving, facial structure, whatever it is. They want that video clip to say, that's who I can connect with, so I'm going to go in and see them. Oh, most definitely.
Yeah, I mean, it used to be, maybe you looked up health grade or something in your plan that said, okay, this is where they went to medical school and this is that. And now it's like, maybe they have an Insta reel about a surgery they just performed for a surgeon, for example. So there's really the table stakes for showing up and connecting with your patients, with your corporations, with your managed care institutions have completely shifted in terms of who is the customer and how do we communicate. So with that communication level, I'd like to shift it a little bit towards companies and organizations, whether they be just a regular manufacturer, a payer, it doesn't really matter what, just saying a large organization. In terms of what are you seeing in terms of social and the shift there for within employer and employee groups and within communications and some change there. And I was wondering if I could toss it back to Babita for that.
It's a great question because there's a lot happening in companies, corporations, especially now around mental health, or sometimes they have it under the umbrella of, wellness. What organizations are doing is they are sort of up-leveling their employee benefit around mental health. But what they're also doing, very importantly, around the social media aspect of it, is that they're creating more programs to up-level the education for their employees to understand the impact of social media and to make it a much more talked about topic. So similar to what we're doing here, there are panel discussions, there are town halls where the impact of social media and mental health is being discussed. Because again, it's a youth issue, but it's also, right, it's an adult issue, it's an all of us issue. They're also doing some more narrow things, for example, doing some partnerships with, hospitals, healthcare organizations, physicians, and practices to put together events for their employees. And HR folks are doing that, to make sure that there is spaces where individuals can either log in virtually and hear people talk about the topic of social media's impact on mental health and provide tips and tools, or to, now attending more so in person. So I would say those are just some of the things that are going on in terms of organizations. I think the other one that's important is the C-suite or leaders of their various departments in, larger corporations, multinational corporations. What they're doing is they're doing more individual newsletters and communications to their employees, and they're bringing in different topics, and one of them is, for example, social media. and really putting that out there in a very candid way and addressing mental health issues in their newsletters, but also putting in aspects around social media.
Thank you. Dr. Priya, did you want to add to that a little something?
Yeah. I'll just add, in a smaller organizations where you generally don't have, too many levels, I think they are still working, like in our organization, which is smaller, we're still working in a way, especially in the pandemic, taking the reference with the mental well-being. So I think the small groups, panels like that, or small group talks. I think in this HR department plays quite a good role in one way, because they are quite approachable, it feels like, to the employees as compared to going to a higher level, and they are better open up, talk. But at the same time, as you pointed, in the larger organizations, having the C-suite level people get involved, or executives getting involved in it, is quite important, because I think it's taken as a reference in an organization that if they are open to talk about it, it's okay to talk about it. So I think it always comes from the top bottom, kind of. So those approaches, even in the smaller organizations, I think have started considering how the social media can be taken for advantage and disadvantage for the corporate level also.
That's great. Jeff, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was going to mention, one of the things we're also seeing with the reorganization of a lot of these companies, the traditional mental health aspect as a practitioner was always, you'd get 3 visits under an EAP, right? You could go employee assistance program, talk to somebody or call and have a phone conversation. We're seeing a lot of larger companies and smaller companies even come out to practices such as myself, and we're creating specific EAP programs for those companies where we're integrating. Now you're going to get more mental health support. You're going to get a lot more options to come in and actually have either in-person or telehealth visits. We're going to integrate our psychiatrists into that approach. We're going to bring in, if we need to, our medical doctor that we have on staff to figure out what else is going on the physical side. So as we're moving in this role, we're seeing the mental health field change, even though the larger companies, such as ones that won't be named, are still impacting their perspective. Companies are actually desiring to spend more funds to support their employees because they see that there's a positive impact on the employees and a reduction of negative employee aspects across the board, which then impacts the family, it impacts the whole community.
Absolutely, and I'm sure most of you have seen this from LinkedIn. It's not a shock, but following on from all that, if you look at the way the C-suite folks, who quite frankly didn't always show up, if you will, unless they maybe had, they were at the level and they had a publicist or a whole team behind them, but you're getting sort of the human side of executives showing up on LinkedIn, talking about their commitment to their employee wellness and betterment as their post, instead of essentially more accomplishment and award signaling as the post. So I think that's another way that we're seeing, social platforms. We were talking a lot about Instagram and TikTok, but also LinkedIn and professional networks and forums and social, because social can be any of those things, and how we are sort of breaking down some barriers in a positive way. So I want to transition to asking each of you about a positive example of positive change in terms of social and mental health since the pandemic that you've seen sort of a burgeoning area of positive change. I'll just turn it to you because you're next to me.
I think talking about positive, for me, social media is like, it's a TV where you don't have to pay for the commercials. So,
Well, you pay with your data, but we'll talk about that later.
Yeah, with the data part, you do lose a little bit there, but it's like you can talk to a larger audience and be more real. I feel like for a commercial or a corporate point of view, and even from an individual point of view, you can still put your point of view. You can still talk about some topic without, you need to have some boundaries talking about it, but still you can be you talking about it. So social media platform positive for me is like, yes, it gives you a platform. You can reach more people, more audiences.
I would say that definitely, I think there's a lot of positive things when done right. I think it's education, right? There's a way that we can get, from an educational standpoint, that we can get data much quicker and faster than without that, if we didn't use that. So definitely, I think, like I said, the personalization I've seen from the business sector of that, from healthcare, is doing very good things by being able to get out resources and educational tips and things like that to patients and for patient healthcare. when used right? So I think there is indeed positive things that can be of value for that, and it's cost effective for our clinics and things like that to be able to reach a bunch of saturated amount of people and be able to give educational value.
From my lens, there are a few positive things. I think, first of all, it has helped to normalize that it is okay to take care of yourself and your mental well-being, just as much as it's okay to take care of, right, your body, et cetera, to really think about, you know, what's good for you as far as your own mental health. It also has helped individuals in a really positive way who were afraid to speak up. And then it helped normalize it. So individuals that were more isolated and may not have had the kind of connection that they needed and were very afraid to be able to have their voice or to kind of be able to connect with other people. I think social media platforms, those communities have really helped with that. If we think about, you know, suicide awareness, if we want to, I know it's, you know, we're going into a whole other direction right now, but I do want to say with social media, there, you know, reliable resources to be able to elevate how important that is to pick up the phone and get help. And what a huge outreach worldwide to be able to do that on these platforms was really important. And then, you know, I think someone brought up LinkedIn. I have to say, being a LinkedIn user myself, I do feel that that's a great social media platform because look at all of us here and professionally being able to network in that way. And as was also mentioned previously, the C-suite having their voices to be able to show some vulnerability around their own mental health has been extremely positive.
Yeah, I want to echo everything that was said there. And I also want to mention that I think in the pandemic, it was a real highlight to what was going on. It helped us see a lot of these things that were needed. I do think the term social distancing was a misnomer. It's not something we should have said or done. It should have been physical distancing, but socially connecting. And I think through social media, it allowed for a lot of the people who were isolated, a lot of people who were marginalized, a lot of people who were left to be by themselves, to still have a connection. There was a lot of Zoom parties that I heard about, a lot of these types of connections that really never happened prior to it. So social media is a great thing when done well or when done properly. It's more about the educational aspect of how do we go about this? When is the right time to share information? What information should be shared, right? I don't think a 10-year-old should be sharing his home address, but we see that. So it's helping not only the younger generation, but also our generation understand how to move forward with the social media. It's here to stay. It's not going away. In fact, we're going to see a lot more social media type platforms coming out that are going to be more dominant than some of the ones that are currently here, because it's the generational piece that starts to pick up. And it's what do we do with that, and how do we help our kids, our families, our friends move forward?
Thank you so much. So I guess we're at the time where I'm hoping you guys are awake and have, you know, it's not lunchtime yet, and somebody can help us out. And if anyone has a question, it would be a great time to come up. Thank you.
I think there is a lot to be learned from people who refrain from going to social media. And many of these are extremely accomplished people and have in real life, and if we call it this way, a lot of influence and impact. So if I may summarize my impression from these people, I know some of them, the main problem is you really have no control of who will address you at all. In real life, you have that to a large degree. And one of the reasons for that is there is no such thing like social media credit score for a person, right? And I wish we had that. So a credit score for a person where you can prove that you are well behaved, you use proper language, you have you acknowledge reason and cognition, and you have no bias, unjustified
You are who you
bias,
say you are.
right? Yeah, good behavior. So in real life, we can learn a lot about what we need in social media. That's my opinion.
That's fabulous. Thank you so much. That's a
That
great-
may not always drive followers, though.
this is kind of a two-parter. For patients that are turning to social media and finding themselves self-diagnosing, what are your thoughts? And also, how do you think we can bridge that gap between people self-diagnosing and getting in to see medical professionals to either validate or contradict that diagnosis?
That is a fabulous question. We were actually talking about this in the hallway, so we may be, that was a softball, thank you. Do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I will take a part of it, and that is what with our MediPocket, though we call it Dr. AI, so we do put the AI to it, but there's a doctor. And we always say that this is only a tool for you to have knowing your symptoms. It is nowhere where replacing a doctor or a clinician for that this is your diagnosis. So maybe if there's a way that they could be communicated the message that you can use the tools outside, like WebMD is a very good tool. But again, it's only for you to navigate your symptoms. It is not for you to diagnose yourself and then go and become a doctor to treat yourself. So I think that's where the awareness has to be done, and especially as a clinicians, us have to be, when the patients are coming and giving their, self-diagnosing themselves that this is what I read, be open about taking it, but maybe break it down with the symptom-wise. Okay, you put these symptoms, but this could be the 3 causes, and you're only taking one, but the probabilities with the, with the lab test and all could be this. So if you can make them aware, like just not blindly following what is being shown on the internet, not just social media, but any internet, I think that is where we can educate one patient, and this about awareness has to be increased.
First of all, fantastic panel. This is really fascinating. And second, especially during the pandemic, I know that loneliness was not just a mental issue, but very serious health issue for a lot of people. And they went to social media to try to fix that. But I think a lot of folks don't necessarily know how to identify what they're looking for to fix that loneliness. I was curious, what is your opinion on some of the red flags that people might encounter within themselves when they're trying to find connection but still find themselves feeling lonely on social media, even if they have 1,000 friends?
Did you just tell about my,
I know,
like
I
you
was
read
like,
my
wait.
bio or something? No.
That's like the sales pitch for my app. No, I'm kidding. So it's really, I was going to say, that's a really great question. Thank you. And it's a really layered question as well. So forgive my pop psychology answer in this moment. But I think we also want to address really quickly that it might be a very different approach and guidance for a different kind of person. So when we were talking about the seniors before, where we've actually seen it being almost a natural bridge to that loneliness gap because of the way they were experiencing tech and social for the first time was about connecting with family, their family literally like mailing a tablet or something and saying, just press this and you can talk to me. Or type in something you're into. You like, nature, whatever, and you can find a group, and essentially using groups and things like that. We've also had a lot of laughs, if you ever look on Reddit or anywhere, about people not realizing when they're posting to a group versus their private thoughts. Those can be funny. And they help other people feel a little less lonely because they relate to some family member who has done that. But if we're talking to younger people, sometimes it can be a little different kind of guidance. And we often say, the gentleman who spoke before about look to the real world and how much can you mirror that. So what are organizations or institutions or places or groups or clubs that have a name that you know is a safe or good trusted source, right? And go to their membership or look there. So that's usually sort of what we try and recommend, at least from our side, is, find as many parallels to the real world as you can as your starting point.
Yeah, and real quick, what I would say is, if you're attempting to go about it in that form and you're not finding what it is you're looking for and you're not feeling the change you desire, then that's an indicator that what you're going after is not achieving you, right? The goal you want to have. So, and there's a lot that can go into that, but that's really it, is what you're doing achieving the goal you're going after?
So we have time for, I think, one last question. Thank you.
Hello, this was great. My business partner and I help run a rural clinic in Louisiana. It's a cardiothoracic clinic. We have a largely geriatric population, and we are introducing the clinic and our patients to social media. And we have a myriad of problems, poverty, connectivity in a rural area, you name it. My question is, we want our patients to engage. We want them to be involved in their health. They just don't seem to want to do it. Any thoughts on how to get a geriatric crowd more engaged through social media?
I always say that, there's layers, right? There's a layered approach to everything. So on the social side, again, who's the target audience? So if the target audience is an older demographic, what platforms are we on, right? And are we on the right platforms that engages for that target audience? I believe in layering a lot of, like, social media is one tool that we communicate with that, but to layer that with some other things. But I think with that, video, right? What we know at the end of the day is anytime that we do anything with video and custom, and what I mean by we're responsible by putting out the right content. But video today, just by results and all across the platform, the more that we can do authentic, real, personal things, and in video, there's a higher engagement factor to that.
Okay.
And
we
to
could have a
add
sidebar
one, oh,
on
sorry.
this. Sorry, I was just going to say, since the time is over, I'd be happy to speak to you about it, also about their resistance, et cetera.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah,
They
and
gotta be
I was
on
going to say,
TikTok.
and sometimes we do sort of, sorry, my marketing side too as well, we actually take offline traditional mailer tools. So we actually have made, little guidebooks about Facebook and things for seniors in terms of deconstructing all the clutter but putting that in a physical thing that they can touch, because that's the first barrier, that's the first comfort zone. And for video, mostly everything is digitized, but we still actually make DVDs that you can stick in a DVD player because they wanted those. So, like, it's sometimes the delivery, so the video, but how they get it. Social, but how do I even start, and what do I do? Like, step by step, click here, like getting them the ability to have that on-ramp. Sometimes that breaks down some of the barriers in and of itself.
And it's all about ease of use, right? Wholeheartedly. There's so much clutter nowadays on some of these things, on these apps. There are apps that are a lot less cluttered, that are
And
so much
designed,
more easier
they're
to
specifically
use.
designed for those demographics. So
What I always think, know your audience too, different, and in rural marketing, right, and how they take content may be different than if you lived in an urban area. So,
Right. Oh, it is.
talked about that too. So happy to talk, but there's, again, know your audience, what's the right way that they capture information and layer that.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
So I guess we're done, right?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Now we do the mic drop. Thank you all.